recording. And you can advance the slides here. Just hit the right arrow.
Okay.
Is this to scale?
Good evening. How is everybody?
Good.
Good, good. Well, welcome to the Los Alamos Faith and Science 2024 Summer Lecture Series. And we are super excited about having James Carroll here. And he brought all of these fantastic displays, and he's going to address that as we go forward. So let me tell you a little bit about what's happening in our world.
Not advancing?
Nope.
All right, let's see. See if you click here, and there you go.
There we go. And I'm glad to see that you guys remembered that we were meeting on Tuesday, not Wednesday. That's exciting. And hopefully next week we won't have pizza. We may have something different. So anyway, enjoy the pizza. Hopefully it tastes all right. So I'm excited to look at this upcoming calendar. Rabbi Jack Slachter, wave. He'll be giving us a lecture next week, and we'll be looking at a number of things with anti-Semitism and anti-science. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And if you look down a little ways, July 23rd, we'll have Dr. Andrew Newberg. He's a neurologist, and he's going to be talking about the studies that he's done in brain mapping during various sensations, whether it's meditation or prayer, and he has quite a few. He's got a new book coming out in August, and if we're lucky, we may be able to have some early copies of his book. So I look forward to that. And then we have Dr. Roy Hill, and he'll be talking about the psychology and statistics of near-death experiences. And so those two will be very complementary as far as what they will be discussing. And they will be, one is coming from Colorado and one is coming from the East Coast. So very excited to have them here. We'll have some special events that involve them, whether it's a luncheon or a discussion group, and I will get the notification out to everybody about that. Cool. So, Dr. James Carroll, and he's going to give us quite an interesting discussion on ancient Near East cultural context for temple worship and where it came from, some ideas on who started it, etc. I'm not going to take away your thunder. I got the privilege today to look at all the slides, and it's fantastic. It's very fascinating. So I hope you'll enjoy his presentation. So let me tell you a little bit about him. Whoops. Yes. Can you see that? Cool. So in his free time, he works at the lab. Like many of us in our free time, right? That's what we do. But anyway, he received his PhD in computer science with an emphasis on artificial intelligence. And if we're lucky, he may be able to bring us up to date on some aspects of artificial intelligence at the end of his talk. So if you want to hang around and ask him some questions and updates on what that field looks like right now, he may even discuss Scarlett Johansson. I don't know, I mean, everybody's talking about Scarlett Johansson. So who knows? We'll see what happens there. So you, in 2010, you graduated from Brigham Young University. You did your dissertation on statistics of machine learning, and I know there's somebody here that really enjoys machine learning, somebody named Mikkel, who's on his cell phone. Get off your cell phone, dude. And as a graduate student, he taught classes on artificial intelligence, Isaiah, the Book of Mormon, the Pearl of Great Price, and the Ancient Scripture Department. And after graduation, he worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory, first as a postdoc, then as a scientist, where he worked primarily on radiography. Yeah, hello. He is currently researching the application of machine learning and artificial intelligence for the analysis of radiographic image data. And he currently attends the Unitarian Universalist Church of Los Alamos, where he teaches adult religious education classes on comparative religion and the Old Testament. And he has his own YouTube channel, which is fascinating. So you guys take advantage of looking at that. So if you will all join me in welcoming Dr. James Carroll.
No one's actually referred to me as doctor in years. All right. So I proposed this talk because it's a topic I spent a lot of time on before, and then it occurred to me that I have about 5 or 6 hours worth of material. And then it occurred to me that cutting it is really hard because in order to explain the ancient Near Eastern context, I have to explain what the Temple of Solomon is, and I'm assuming most of you know what Israelite temple worship is about, so maybe I don't need to do that, but if I show you all this ancient Near Eastern stuff and you don't know how it relates to the Israelite stuff, then the significance isn't there. So it was really hard. I eventually decided I'm just going to have to assume you know your way around ancient Israelite religion and just show some of the ancient Near Eastern stuff. But I want you to bear with me because I got a lot, even after my cutting, and I'm going to go fast, and I'm just going to give a very brief overview. But if any of you actually want to know more about this, I can set up a 5-hour or something, and we can really do this if we really want to do it. But and obviously, it's not my job to decide what the Los Alamos Faith and Science Forum is, but from watching for a while, it feels to me like it's an interfaith dialogue where people from multiple different religious traditions get together. A lot of us scientists, some of us who work at the lab, and so we have science as a career, and we talk about the intersection of our faith and our scientific endeavors. And so if that's what it is, I think that maybe plays a role in what I'm going to do. But there's a sense, I think, that science is at odds with religion, and we have to reconcile our science with our faith because, of course, we're reacting, I think, to the very strident debate between the atheists and the theists. And so to position myself and to appreciate your willingness to invite me here, by the way, I need to just be upfront about my own biases and where I come from. I'm what I would call a theist-leaning agnostic, or maybe a hopeful agnostic, meaning I don't know if there's a God. I hope there might be. I see no reason to suppose there isn't, and I see no reason to be sure that there is. I would say that I have faith that if there is a God, that God is not mad at me for not believing without sufficient evidence or good reasons to believe. Like I don't believe that God cares whether we believe. That's why he hasn't provided sufficient evidence for that belief. But this is my bias. But that means I come to the debate about science and faith from a perspective where I'm not interested in trying to prove or disprove or take a stand on that issue. It's not important to me. I'm much more interested in some other questions. Like, is there a God is the least interesting question on this list of questions. You like my AI-generated God asking questions. So I'm much more interested in what is God like, whether they exist or not. What do you even think God is like? Because you will imitate what you see as the ultimate. And so if you believe in a God who burns people for all eternity for doing the wrong thing and being imperfect, well, then you probably may have immoral tendencies yourself. On the other hand, if you believe in a deity who's loving and compassionate, you are likely to be loving and compassionate and caring. And so what is God like is far more interesting than is there a God? How should we live? What did our ancestors believe and why? And what does all this tell us about what it means to be human? I'm much more interested in those questions. And I hope that means that I can approach this in a way that whether you are a believer or a non-believer, I am not here to challenge your belief. I'm not here to change your belief. I'm just here to talk about what I consider the interesting questions in a spirit of sharing between denominations and maybe even between believers and non-believers. I'm not here to argue. Now, normally what we do is we talk about science, like physics, or because we're physicists, right? We work at the lab, so we talk about physics or artificial intelligence or something. We talk about the connection between physics and our faith. Or maybe even we go so far as to talk about geology in our faith. But here I'm going to talk about history and archaeology in our faith. And I know that there's some feeling of whether that really is science. And that's okay. But I think that some of the same issues of reconciling and or informing come up. And again, I am much more interested in informing. What can archaeology, history inform us about our beliefs and about the beliefs of our ancestors? And that, again, is much more interesting than just trying to reconcile a specific position to the history. So here we have a picture of Solomon's Temple. I'm sure you've all seen Solomon's Temple before, and here's a nice, beautiful picture of, is that really Solomon's Temple? Sorry, this is probably a bad joke, but that's not Solomon's Temple, but it sure as heck looked like it if you're familiar with Solomon. This is a Syrian temple. And you'll see a nice picture of the goddess in the back on the deity. This is clearly not the Temple of Solomon, but it looks like the Temple of Solomon. This brings up, I guess, the main point. And that is the temple worship. When I say, I titled my slide, The Temple Cult of Israel, by the way. I don't mean Jim Jones' cult. I'm using it in the archaeology, comparative religion, religious studies sense of a ritual religious center. The cult is the ritual element of the religion. So how does the cultic element of the Israelite religion looks an awful lot like the pagan religions around it? So what does that mean, and how do we deal with this similarity? An atheist might say something like, well, Judaism clearly evolved from these pagan precursors, therefore it's not true. I don't think that argument really holds much water, because there are other options. The fundamentalist, for example, is just to deny the similarities entirely. The problem, of course, with this approach is it makes less sense than the atheist one, because all I have to do is go back to this picture and go, oh, really? And if your faith is based on this, your faith becomes brittle, because as soon as you're exposed to the similarity, it breaks, because it's clearly just factually in error. So take two, maybe Satan imitates the truth. This is a good way to demonize any religion that's not the same as yours, especially the pagan religions around Israel. And to be fair, the Israelite prophets like to do this once in a while. But I think it's not a very compassionate view, and it sometimes strawmans the pagan religions around it. And so I think we'll try to give a better view of what those pagan religions were really like. But this is one option, right? Maybe it's similar because this is Satan just imitating some eternal truth. But there is an alternative that I would like to propose. And this is kind of, if I were to be a believer, this would be my favorite sort of explanation for this. And that is that symbolism is a language like English is a language. And if God came down to talk to you, he wouldn't speak to you in French, unless you happen to speak French, because he would know you would not understand. So if symbolism is a language, then a deity maybe has a message they want to convey, and clearly they would use the language the people understand. And symbolism has a cultural context. Now, if that's true, and I believe it is in the sense that if there is a God who wants to communicate, this is how they would do it. And if that is true, then if you want to understand that message today, more than 2,000 years after the message was conveyed, it would behoove you to learn about the cultural context in which the people lived who received this information, because that context will be essential for understanding the content of the revelation. So again, my point isn't to necessarily pick one of these for you or to force you into one of them, or clearly it's not to tell you because of this information you shouldn't believe or you should. My point is, however things fall in this conversation, what I want you to feel is comfortable. Your faith is not at risk as we explore the similarities, because there are faithful and faithless ways of interpreting this. But in the faithless way, where there is no God, well then, if this evolved from the things around it, we need to know the things around it to understand it. So understanding requires cultural context. In the faithful way, God speaks to us according to our language, our understanding. Therefore, to understand it, you have to understand the cultural context around it. So my point is, I hope whether you're a believer or a non-believer, you see the significance of this topic. So again, these two conclusions are two conclusions you could come to, and I'm not here to force you to pick. Doesn't really matter to me. So the first realization, Israelite temple worship and the cult involves very rich and complex symbolism. There's altars of sacrifice. If I can get can I get the little, yeah, here, there's, let's see. Is my laser pointer even over there? There it is. Where it is, it vanished. Aha, there I see it. So there's an altar of sacrifice here with these 4 nice horns. This is a laver. It's a washing basin of some sort. There's this rich layers of cloth around this tent. This is the Tabernacle of Moses, by the way. There are several versions of the Israelite temple. This is the Tabernacle of Moses. We have a 7-branch candlestick with almond knops, so it's some sort of a tree with light or fire burning on its branches. We have a table with bread upon it, and we have an altar for incense, and we, of course, have the Ark of the Covenant in 3 rooms, a courtyard, a holy place, and a Holy of Holies. So there's rich symbolism here. So what do we do with that? Well, the modern, and I didn't put this up to be critical of Kabbalah, but what I'm saying here is that the modern response to this sort of thing is to see deep, hidden, secret mysteries. We want to find the deep, secret, hidden mysteries buried in all this symbolism. And I want to propose that the temple and its worship made perfect sense to the people who performed it, who participated in it. In their cultural context, it wasn't deep, secret, mysterious. It was very straightforward, and it made perfect sense to them. And the reason it no longer makes sense to us is because we have lost that cultural context. And in its place, we've invented sometimes more than is really there, or at least the wrong thing compared to what is there. We see things that maybe aren't real. So the secret to symbolism is that its purpose is to reveal, not just to conceal, or not even primarily to conceal. Its purpose is to reveal, and it forms an allegory or a metaphor. So here's an example from Isaiah chapter 1. Hear, O heavens, give ear, O earth, for the Lord hath spoken. I have nourished and brought up children, and they have rebelled against me. The ox knows his owner. The ass his master's crib, according to King James. It's feeding trough. The ass knows his master's feeding trough, but Israel does not know, my people doth not consider. Does not know what? Who his master is. My people does not consider what? Who owns them. You see it? My people, the ox knows his owner. Israel does not consider what? The ass knows his master's feeding trough. Who feeds it? Okay, so we're using an ox and an ass here. Why? Well, what are we could assume that the ox is all about strength, right? So this is about strength. Well, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't fit the context. But asses are actually known for being rather stubborn little beasts, and oxes are well known for being pretty stupid. Powerful, strong, but stupid. So what is Isaiah really saying? Let's put it in very blunt terms. You're dumber than an ass, and you're dumber than an ox, and you're more stubborn than an ass. So the nature of the thing being used as a symbol forms a metaphor. So there's not some secret mystical handbook where you look up ox in the handbook and you figure out what it represents, and that's what it always represents. You look at the characteristics of an ox and you see which ones are we making an analogy to. The exact same thing happens with the temple. The temple is just a series of analogies, and they're very, again, straightforward and would have made a lot of sense to the people. All communication, I propose, is this form of symbolism. There's a concept in my brain, this cute cat, and I say, cats are cute. And so I've turned this concept in my brain, in neural pathways in my brain, into some sound waves that travel across the space. They hit your ear, they go into your brain, and you reconstruct the concept. And you come from, this cute little cat in my brain to this cute little cat in your brain, and we hope they're sort of the same. And in this case, they're significantly different, but at least they have the concept of cat right, and hopefully some sort of cuteness, although we can argue about what's cute and what isn't. So this is the key to interpreting symbolism. Symbolism is just communication. All communication happens through symbolism. What we call symbolic usually just means communication at a slightly more abstract level, the level of metaphor and simile. And so let the nature of the object guide the simile you're looking for, the analogy. And place the question in its historical context first. Let me give an example where people do this wrong. Isaiah 13 through 14 has this reference to how art thou fallen from heaven, Lucifer, son of the morning. It's about the devil, right? No, it says at the very beginning, it's about the king of Babylon. Okay, so maybe it's symbolism about the devil or something. Well, you have to understand how every passage in that verse applies to the king of Babylon first, because every passage in that text does apply to the king of Babylon directly, even the reference to Lucifer. In fact, the only reason Lucifer is a name for the devil is because of that passage. We took that passage and decided that Lucifer, therefore, is the name for the devil. This passage is about the king of Babylon. Now, after you do that, if you want, you can say the king of Babylon is like the devil in these ways. But to interpret it right, and you'll get a much richer interpretation, go through first, because it says it's about the king of Babylon. It's not going to lie to you. It's not a code word for some mysterious book where you look it up, King of Babylon is really about the devil. It's straight up, it's about the king of Babylon in their day. And then you can say the king of Babylon is like the devil, if you want, as an extra layer. But if you don't do its historical context and view it in its historical context first, you miss it. Because, for example, the devil... it says Lucifer will die and his body will rot in the streets and be treated by the dogs, and none of that makes sense directly related to Lucifer, but it makes sense when it's talked about the king of Babylon, and then it can become an analogy for Lucifer just fine. Do you see what I'm trying to say here? Okay. The other one is place the question in its historical context first, but then place the symbolism in that same historical context. For example, if I mention black cat has symbolic meaning, right? But if I mention black cat in Egypt, I'm probably referring to a deity. If I mention a black cat in Salem, Massachusetts, or on Halloween, I'm probably referring to the familiar of a witch and the devil, and it has almost opposite meaning. And so when I say black cat, if you want to know what I mean by that, you have to know the context, historical and time-wise, that I'm saying it and what it meant to the people around it. Okay. Enough of this. So if we want to interpret the temple, there's a couple sources we can turn to. We have the description of the temple in the biblical text. And if you go to my webpage after this, I will have links, and if you're watching online in the video description, if you're watching on my YouTube channel anyway, I will have a link to a series of handouts that have every passage that refers to every piece of the temple. So if you want all the passages that refer to the altar of symbolism, altar of sacrifice, I put this together when I made my temple models over here. So I wanted every passage that told me what this altar of sacrifice looked like, and I wanted that because I was going to build me one, and I wanted to see if I could make sense of the text so I knew what it should look like. And I will say the text is ambiguous enough that it's hard, but I'll give you those handouts. You can look at them, and it'll have every passage for every piece of furniture, and you can see what they look like or what the descriptions is. But the Bible also has several allegories and comparisons. In other words, the Bible itself has some description of the meaning of the temple. We shouldn't just, wander into pagan temples first. The Bible itself will tell you what the temple means. We have to start there. It turns out there are other Israelite temples, and the advantage we have of those is that they've actually been excavated. Whereas the Temple of Solomon was destroyed, and you can't really excavate the Dome of the Rock, and if you did, there's probably nothing left anyway. Some of these other Israelite temples have been excavated, and they tell us some important things about what early Israelite temple worship was like. We'll show you those, and we'll talk about them. Then we can look at the Canaanite temples and pagan temples around Israel. Israel lives right in the middle of... Here's Israel. They live right in the middle of Egypt and Mesopotamia, and up here the Hittites. They're right in the middle of three superpowers. But they also live in the middle of the Canaanites and the Philistines who live here, who also build temples. And so Israelite culture is an amalgamation of those groups I just mentioned that surround them. And we could do an hour on each of them, and you would learn something interesting about each one, and it would be a lot of fun. We just don't have time. So we're gonna just jump straight into Egypt, really. But here are some of the Israelite temples. There's more than one. So when we talk about the cultic religion of Israel, there's more than one. The oldest mentioned is the Tabernacle of Moses. Its historicity is in debate. So whatever you believe about that is not important to me. But you should know that some scholars do believe this really existed. Some other scholars believe it's a later description of something that never really existed. But later, the tabernacle moved to Shiloh. And then it was destroyed in the days of David and Saul. And then Solomon supposedly built a temple. And this is where we move from places where we aren't sure about the historicity to places where we know the historicity is correct. Because we start getting into Hezekiah and some of these other people who are attested in extra biblical sources. And so this is the temple they would have worshipped at. Their myths, at least, claimed was built by Solomon and David. And then it was destroyed by the Babylonians. It was rebuilt in the temple of Zerubbabel and Herod. And this is the temple that Jesus would have worshipped in, is this temple of Herod. And then, of course, the Bible describes this temple that Ezekiel sees that he says will be built in the last days. So the Bible has several descriptions of temples. And so there's more than one, but they all have similar elements, right? A courtyard, an altar, washing implements. Inside here they have a lampstand and table of showbread, a table of offerings, a candle, and a incense altar, and then the Holy of Holies with an ark and cherubim inside. So those elements are consistent. So what does the Bible say this all means? Well, it offers several allegories for the meaning of this structure. The first is a place of sacrifice and offering. It's connected to the creation of the world, the Garden of Eden, Mount Sinai, and God's house or palace. Sacrifice was really important to the Israelites. So again, I told you we need to talk on Israelite temples before we do and I tried to condense this, but we have to give some background. Sacrifice was important to them. This is how they atoned for sins. This is how they cleaned their temples of ritual impurity. This is how they expunged ritual impurity. And it's also how they offered gifts to their God of gratitude. By offering these animals as sacrifice, the animal would be burnt on the altar. The priests and the people would eat part of the sacrifice, and then part of it would be burned for the deity. We have, by the Greek, references to this sort of idea that says that the god smells the smoke and consumes the smoke. The smoke goes up to heaven, and the god consumes the smoke. And we even get these references in the biblical text where it describes a sweet savor unto God, like he's smelling the sacrifice and it smells good to him. So again, that doesn't have to be literal, but this is at least an allegory they tell. But the temple is also connected to the creation. If you're familiar with the documentary hypothesis, whether you agree with that or not, it says that certain parts of the first 5 books were written by several different authors, P, J, E, and D. P supposedly wrote the creation account, which starts with water, light and dark is created, water, sky, earth, then the sun, moon, fish, birds, animals, and mankind, and then rest. You'll notice how it's parallel. Light and dark is the thing, and the sun and the is the medium, and then the sun and the moon is the agent that moves through that medium. The water in the sky is the medium, and then the fish and the birds move through the water in the sky. The earth and the vegetation is the medium, and then the animals and mankind move through that medium. So it ends up in this parallel structure, followed by rest, or sacred time, is established on the 7th day. P also gives us the creation of the tabernacle in Exodus. And when he does, he uses several words like finished, work he hath done, work he hath done, finished. These words are repeated. He saw all that he had made and found it was good. Moses saw the work and found that he had made as Yahweh commanded. And it was so God blessed the 7th day and sanctified it. And Moses blessed the people. And and then the tabernacle is made in 7 periods. They don't really line up. It's not like period 1 really aligns with period 1 of the creation, but in P's account of the creation of the tabernacle, there are also 7 periods that end on a 7th period of rest, where sacred time is established. So in the creation, God created the space of the world and then established sacred time. And then in the tabernacle, they make it in 7 periods and then establish sacred time. at the end of the 7 periods of creation. So P seems to connect his own creation account with the tabernacle and its building by having, again, similar words as well as a similar structure, 7 days. It's also possible the creation account in Genesis 1, with its repetition, God saw that it was good, and 7 days, sounds very ritualistic. So many have proposed that it was actually read at the temple. And several Jewish traditions agree that this count was read as part of the temple ritual, although that's not completely obvious from the text. So the temple is connected to creation. But it's also connected to the Garden of Eden in some pretty significant ways. All we have to do is kind of put these pictures next to each other, and I hope you can kind of see it. But to make it maybe more explicit, God's throne is up here. I can get my mouse to, there it is. God's throne is up here. We have the tree of life. We have the cherubim and the flaming sword. We have the 4 rivers. And then out here to the east of Eden, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel offer sacrifice to God. They build an altar and offer sacrifice. And in the temple, of course, we have the Holy of Holies, which is this depiction of God's throne. We have the menorah, which is this tree, with the fruit of the tree being sitting over here on the offering table. You have this water for washing, and then you have this altar out in the courtyard. So here's the courtyard, here's the garden, and then here's the heavens. Christian mythology will play games with this that I think are very kind of instructive. Obviously, I'm not claiming was the intent of the temple, but this is how later Christian theologians saw the same concept. Here we have Mary offering the fruit of the tree of life from the Garden of Eden to the penitent members of the church, and in the form of the Eucharist, the sacrament, the wafers of bread from the Eucharist. And on the other side, of course, we have the serpent giving the fruit of the tree of knowledge to Eve, who she is giving to the sinners, overseen by a demon on this side. I can find my mouse again. I don't know why it's so hard to figure out where my mouse is. But anyway, there's a demon on the right, and then there's this angel, probably Michael, I believe, on the left, kind of overseeing the distribution of the 2 fruits. And they've actually put them both on the same tree. And then to make sure you don't miss it, they've got Adam's skull hanging on one side of the tree, and they've got Christ hanging upon the tree on the other side. You see, the fall brings death. That allows Christ to die. Christ's death brings life and undoes the fall. This is a reversal of the fall motif. This is exactly what we see here. If you kind of enter the temple and you face one direction from here to here, you're performing an atonement. You're undoing the fall. If you were in here and going that direction, you would be falling. And by the way, the word for repent in Hebrew is to turn around. So you fall, then you turn around, and you go back the other way. And the temple tells you how they thought you did that. You did it by offering sacrifice, by being clean. And then you're allowed through the cherubim who guard the way, where you can eat the fruit of the tree of life. And the burning bush here is our fruit of the tree of life. The altar here produces the smoke of the veil that was present at Mount Sinai. You pass the veil into God's throne room. This is God's throne. God is a king sitting on his throne, and there's the mercy seat. And you appeal to the king, who is your judge, and he judges you and finds you worthy, and you're forgiven, and you're brought back. This is the atonement. So the temple represents this concept of atonement, covering your sins. The mercy seat is the seat of atonement, or the seat wherein your sins are covered. All right. The other analogy that's used in the text is Mount Sinai. Israel goes to Mount Sinai, there they meet God, and then they take God with them to the promised land. So they have to build a portable Mount Sinai. And so if I line it up this way, you can see there's the altar where they offer sacrifice and covenant to obey God. There's the rock that Moses strikes and the water flows out. Partway up the mountain is the burning bush. And here's our candlestick, that's our burning bush. And then you have the smoke. This is the incense altar, recreates the smoke through the veil. And on top of that is God, and his finger reaches through the veil, and he writes the 2 tables of stone that then get put in the Ark of the Covenant. So the Mount Sinai has these 3 divisions to it. And there's actually specific divisions where the Israelites can go here, the priests can go here, and Moses only can go to the top. And this same sort of division happens in the tabernacle. The Levites can go here, the priests can go here, only the high priest can go here, this sort of thing. And so it really is a scale model of Mount Sinai. So these are the Israelites. They also call it God's palace. I'll show you 2 examples from Canaanite thrones. that show you that the temple is built like a Canaanite or Egyptian palace. And so this is the palace for God, which indicates that God is a king. Right? This is God's palace, and that's what we're building. Okay, so that was all background because that's just kind of what the Bible says about it. Now we want to talk about ancient Egypt. This is what the actual talk was supposed to be about. But again, if I don't have that background, I don't know how to see the significance of what comes next. So let's dive into ancient Egypt, and we'll talk about Egyptian temples. And the whole idea, I hope, is that you'll see just how similar they are, both in their themology and in their literal structure. So this is the excavation of Hierakonpolis' oldest temple. It dates, I think it's like 3000 BC or something absurdly old. I need to go back and look that up. I can't remember. But what we have here is a reconstruction of what they think it looked like. There's these posts. Now, it was all made out of wood, so everything's kind of gone, but you can see the post holes here. And those are these post holes. So what we have is a courtyard with a flagpole. We have these posts, and then we have a more sacred kind of room, holy place in the back where the throne of the deity sits. What does this represent? Well, temple inscriptions express the belief that each temple was the continuation and reflection of the earliest mythical temple, which came into existence at the beginning of the world as God's seat on the first occasion. In the creation, chaos reigned. The waters covered the earth. From the primeval waters there emerged low mud island. And in the flotsam and jetsam at the edge of the waters, a piece of reed had drifted ashore and was picked up by some demigods and stuck into the ground near the water's edge. This is this falcon who sticks the reed. You see this post with the falcon on top? This is also an Egyptian hieroglyph of the same thing. This is the falcon who picks up the reed and places it on the edge. Out of the gloom there came a falcon, which settled on the reed and sanctified the island. As a sacred place, it needed protection, so a simple reed wall seems to have been built around the island. And as the waters receded, the island grew bigger. It was possible to add rooms on either side in the first humble chamber. So ultimately a complete temple of reeds came to be built. This is Rosalie David, A Guide to Religious Ritual at Abydos, which I highly recommend as a book, by the way, to read if you're interested in this. I'm going to take a little bit of liberties with this myth, but I want to give you the general idea of this is what I would consider the Egyptian version of the fall, and there's several versions of it, and again, I'm taking some liberties with the general concept, but I think it's roughly equivalent to kind of what you can piece together from several different myths, and it goes something like this. Originally, God, Ra, lived on Earth with us, and if you've seen any science fiction like what's it called, Stargate, they play on this myth heavily. But originally, God lived with us, and we were his slaves. But we rebelled, and we annoyed God in our rebellion so much that he just said, forget them, and left. And he went up to heaven. And he even sent this cow to rage on the earth and destroy us all because he was so mad at us. This is like the flood story, only it's a raging bull cow. And then eventually, God is convinced to be compassionate. The destruction ends. And people realize that now they have to take care of themselves. I mean, before they were slaves to God, but now they have to figure out how to earn a living all on their own without God's help. And it's actually harder. It's worse than it was when God was here. And so you kind of feel bad. And you're like, maybe we shouldn't have rebelled. What do you think? And so what they do is they start building temples. They take statues of the god. And when God lived here and they were his slaves, they would wash, clothe, and anoint and feed the deity. Well, the deity leaves and goes up to heaven. Well, now they take a statue of the deity, which they are well aware is not God. Like the biblical joke is that they worship wood and stone, the works of their own hands, but they don't worship the idol. They know the idol isn't deity, but they make this idol and they start to wash, clothe, anoint, and feed the idol. Why? Because they're trying to show God that they're sorry for rebelling and they wish they could be back washing, clothing, and feeding the deity because that was better than being off on their own. This is the Egyptian sort of version of the fall. And I think you can see parallels to it in the Israelite story of the fall. Now, I took some liberties in this story, but I think that does capture sort of its essence. And this is why the Egyptian ritual includes things like bringing loads of food and placing it on a little altar in front of the deity. And to be fair, I said they don't worship the statue. They don't. They worship the God, and they know the God is in heaven, and they know the statue isn't the God. But they also believed, long before Plato, in a concept very similar to Plato's forms. And that is that the symbol of the thing somehow captures the essence of the thing. So the statue of the deity may not be the deity, but because it is the symbol of the deity, it can capture some elements of the deity's essence. Just like a picture of me somehow captures some of my essence. Just like my mummy maybe captures some of my essence and therefore allows me to live forever. The whole idea of making a mummy is to make an idol of me, to deify me, because it captures some of my essence so that my spirit can live on. So they believed that the deity was up in heaven, but they also believed that the statue could sort of embody some aspect of the deity that could then dwell with them. And then they would offer food on these little tables. And the deity would consume the essence of the food in the same way that the deity's statue is just the essence of the deity. And then the priest would then eat the food. After leaving it out for the deity overnight, then the priest would come and eat it. Well, that form shows up in the Temple of Solomon in what we call the table of showbread, or the table of the presence. Showbread is the King James, right? And King James stuck, unfortunately, but it's a confusing translation. But it's the table of the presence with the 12 lobes representing the 12 tribes, and according to the Talmud, bottles of wine that you would then place on this table before the deity, and the deity would then, it was an offering to the deity. Well, then you eat the physical part, the deity eats the form of the thing, and you just had a communal meal with deity. Now again, I'm not implying that this is later Christian Eucharist. I'm saying later Christian Eucharist has the same symbolic elements. Right? That this is a communal meal with the deity, and that's how you enter covenant with the deity. It's what we still do today. If you invite somebody over and you want to make a treaty with somebody, the first thing you do is you sit down and you eat together. You break bread together. This is a way of having a communal meal with the deity, and it's the same thing we see in Egypt in great detail. This is the Karnak temple liturgy. Our second semester Egyptian class tried desperately to translate this thing. I still have my notes. I cannot read it anymore. There was a time when I could, take a whole semester to read a few lines of it and sort of feel like I was doing well, but it says roughly, these are the things that was done every day in the temple of Amun-Ra Sonter, king of the gods, by the high priest, the one who is on duty that day. And then it says, and then you have this little chunk in red, and each chunk in red is a different chapter, a recitation for doing different elements of this daily ritual. I'm going to go through the ritual because it has similarities both to the Day of Atonement, which I'm not going to have time to point out or even explain. I hope you know the Day of Atonement. But it has similarities to the Day of Atonement. It also has similarities to the daily ritual in the Temple of Solomon, where they would go in and burn incense. They would offer sacrifice, take the coal from the sacrifice, bring it to the altar of incense, and then they would burn incense on that altar. So these are the recitations. The recitation for lighting or striking a torch, for bearing a censer, for placing incense upon the censer, for placing incense upon the fire. Again, burning incense, this is the sort of thing you did in the Temple of Solomon as well. It even has a nice description of what incense means. There shall be made a heaven with stars, purified with natron, which is a form of soap, and with incense. In other words, back in the day, before the invention of deodorant, people smelled bad. Everything smelled bad, and incense smelled good, and you would make a space less offensive by burning incense. It would smell good, and that would make it a clean place where the deity could come and live. So after you do these preparatory things, you start to travel inside. You start out in this courtyard. If you look at the map has a courtyard. Then you travel inside through this pillared hall, and then back here to the Holy of Holies, which is right here. And then these are all storage rooms that surround it. Very much like the Temple of Solomon floor plan, I might add. A courtyard, a holy place that's a hypostyle hall, meaning a hall with pillars, and then a higher room with windows that come through the celestia at the top. Same floor plan we have here, and then a Holy of Holies in the back with storage rooms around the sides. So there's then a recitation for traveling to the holy place and another recitation for traveling. And in these recitations, what they do is they ritually wake up the temple. The temple is this depiction of that primordial mountain with a garden, all these reeds and things. Each of these pillars represents a big reed, and it's like a big marsh garden place. And they're turning the stone representations of the thing into the thing. It's again awakening the forms, or calling the forms down to dwell and inhabit this stone building. And if you can imagine carrying a little small torch back into this dark place with the flickering light and maybe a little bit of light, this is just the rising of the sun, so a little light coming through the celestiary windows at the top, slanting down into the temple, while you hold this little torch and you burn this incense and you say these words about, waking this place up and turning it into, and as the light flickers, you can imagine that what an emotional experience this sort of thing might be. This is what it looked like. These are my pictures from my trip to Karnak. And this is what I mean by those windows, right? The celestiary windows at the top of this hypostyle hall. And you walk back through here, back into the back. As you approach, again, the Holy of Holies here in the middle. And this is a picture, again, this is my picture of the Holy of Holies at the Temple of Karnak. And what do you see on it? Well, these are depictions of the washing of the king, the anointing of the king, and the crowning of the king. And below it we have pictures of the ark that would have sat in the temple. Yes, the Holy of Holies had an Ark of the Covenant, and it's not there anymore, but we have nice pictures of what it looked like, and it even has this cloth thing. If I can find my mouse again, here it is. And I lost it. Oh, there it is. It has this cloth thing that covers the center part of the ark, and it's a boat-looking thing on poles that sits on a little stand. People can carry the boat on the poles. This cloth can cover the deity, and the deity would then sit inside this boat. And then the boat was actually taken out on certain festivals and paraded through the town. Then you have the recitation for parting the veil. So you've made it to the Holy of Holies, but you're not inside yet. So you have a recitation for parting the veil. The veil is very interesting. It's called a yadit in Egyptian, and that is the same word used in the Book of the Dead to describe the fisherman's net. So in several chapters in the Book of the Dead, a fisherman's net, you're traveling through the sky. You've awakened the boatman, and now you travel through the sky towards heaven, and there's these deities there that are fishing, and if you get caught in their net, you don't get to make it to heaven. You're caught and you're trapped. But there's a recitation, a spell you can recite that will let you pass safely through the veil. Well, that's in their journey to the afterlife, their funerary text. The temple text is very connected to the funerary text because it also has this reference to a veil, and same word is used, and the recitation for parting the veil is related to the recitation for passing the net in the Book of the Dead. Then you break the seal. There would have been a rope and holding the door closed, and a clay seal on it that had been stamped, so you could tell if the door had been disturbed. So you break the seal, and then you enter the Holy of Holies. You draw back the bolt, and luckily the last 3 chapters of this are actually inscribed on the wall, so we have pictures of it, not just the text in that papyrus I showed you, but we also have the text inscribed on the walls, along with a pictorial description of what's happening. So you draw back the bolt, and you enter the doors of heaven. This is nice because it tells you what the Holy of Holies represents. So for the Egyptian, this is heaven. Remember, God left and went to heaven. So now you've brought a picture of heaven down to the earth where you can still go wash, clothe. And then the next bit is you wash, clothe, anoint, and feed the statue. So see if I can still do this. When this is open, this is the dual doors of heaven. So open the dual doors of heaven. You draw back the doors. You've broken the bolt. You've opened the seal. You pass the veil. You draw back the doors. And inside would be a statue of the deity. The next bit is you fall down on your face and you worship the deity, and you say, I have not come to remove the deity from his throne, but to place him upon his throne. You take him out, you wash, clothe, anoint, feed him, and you place him back. And then you close the doors and reestablish the bolt and reseal the door, and you do everything backwards.
James, would you say that a little slower? Just that last section about the washing.
Oh yeah, so you open the door, you fall on your face. So there's this prostration element. You fall on your face, and you say, I have not come to remove the deity from his throne, but to place the deity upon his throne. You wash, clothe, anoint, and feed the statue of the deity. And then you close the doors, reseal, redraw the bolt, reseal the doors, replace the veil, and then you back yourself out of the temple. And so what did this ark thing look like? Well, in Karnak, it's gone. This was actually a recreation as well. I don't know if we have any of these extant, but we have lots of pictures of them. This is a recreation. But this is sort of what these arks looked like. If I look at a drawing from the side, you'll get the idea. This looks as much, this is the Ark of the Covenant from, this is our nice movie, Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's a good depiction of the Ark, I have to admit. And so I put this here for comparison. This is just a box, but its terminology does imply some boat analogies, and it also is used to part the River Jordan, which is like the veil as you enter the Promised Land. So you pass through the River Jordan with the ark, and it parts the river. But it is not the same word as the Ark of Noah's Ark, so we shouldn't be we shouldn't overthink that. But it does seem to have some boat implications. It has 2 poles, and it has these, most important, these cherubim. By the way, we don't know what cherubim look like. This is what the Egyptian version looked like, and I'll show you later Canaanite cherubim. They look very different. And Israel lived between the two. We don't know which one they would have used in their depiction. So the cherubim either look like the Egyptian version or the Mesopotamian version. We don't know. And you'll see depictions of the ark using either one. They'll alternate back and forth as to which version of this they use. But either way, these winged beings are always the guardians of the deity who sits between the two. Both the similarities and the differences are instructive. In the Egyptian version, this is actually a box, and you open it up, and inside is a statue of the deity. The Israelite version has no statue of the deity, and it explicitly says, don't make a statue of the deity. You don't need one. And then if you ask why, the text tells you. It says, because I, the Lord, will meet you here. So the idea is, remember, the Egyptian theme is that God went up into heaven, and so you make a symbol of them on the earth to show them that you've repented by washing, clothing, and feeding the symbol, which used to be your job, to wash, clothe, and feed the actual deity. But the actual deity is gone. And Israelite's theology is reacting to that, specifically when it says, no, I am actually here with you. I'm not gone. You don't need a statue of me because I will be here. Again, I think you have to see both the similarities and the differences to understand what's happening in the Israelite version. Just like the Egyptian version, it's a throne of God. It's a depiction of heaven. But in the Israelite version, it's a depiction of heaven so God can come down from heaven and live with you. Whereas in the Egyptian version, God has left and you're trying to show your repentance by serving a symbol of the deity. And so Israel explicitly says, we're going to leave this symbol out. And it was their way of saying we're better than the Egyptians because our God actually comes down and lives with us. This is the Mesopotamian. On the left here, by the way, is another. Egyptians loved these kind of portable shrines with the sticks. This is the sacred pillar of Osiris being held by these sacred sticks. I believe at Abydos, but I can't remember. It's been a long time. And again, it's not exactly the same, but here we have kind of a sled version with these kind of runners. And again, the pillars, not exactly a boat, but more of a sled that could be pulled along the ground with the sacred pillar here. But on the right here, I have a Mesopotamian throne for a king. These are what I call the Mesopotamian cherubim. They look more like sphinxes with wings. But they have exactly the same purpose. They guard the sacred shrine. They guard the sacred deity, and they stand on either side of the sacred deity and guard it and protect it. All right, one other point from Egypt. This is a really hard to see drawing of a battle in which Ramses fought. But if I kind of false colorize it and zoom in, this is the Battle of Kadesh, and this is a tent. See all these lines around here? This is the wall of a tent, goes all the way around. And then in the middle of this courtyard is where he musters his troops. But in the center, you have this, I lost my mouse again. Where is it? Okay, here's my mouse. I have to move slowly. Right here. This is this inner thing with a kind of an antechamber where people come to make requests of the king. And then his throne is hidden in this kind of inner section of the tent. This tent looks an awful lot like the Tabernacle of Moses. And it's important, I think, to point out that this battle took place roughly at the time period. This puts the tent of the tabernacle roughly in the right time period for the historical Exodus. I'm making no claims about the historicity of the Exodus, but I at least want to point out that the tabernacle, as described in the biblical text, looks a lot like cultural things from Egypt from the right time period. This is this Battle of Kadesh. So here I've made a comparison, right, of Ramses' camp and the tabernacle and the temple. And you can see the similar sort of floor plan being played out. If you want to know more about Egypt, A Guide to Religious Ritual at Abydos, and I'm going to flip through these fast, but if you want them after, come back to me and I'll go back to these slides. Egyptian Temples by Margaret Murray, The Complete Temples of Ancient Egypt, and Dieter Arngold, The Temples of the Last Pharaohs. These last two are primarily picture books, which is really great for kind of seeing what this looked like. These two kind of describe the ritual and go into more of the mythology and the ritual around them. All right, now let me check my time. I've got 5 minutes. Let's do Temples of the Levant. The Levant, by the way, is this middle ground between Egypt and Turkey on the north and Mesopotamia on the east, right against the Mediterranean Sea, that includes Jerusalem and then up into Syria, Damascus, that sort of thing. This is, for years, used to be considered the closest parallel to Solomon's temple. And by the way, this is the temple I showed you at the very beginning. Remember when I said this is Solomon's temple? And we don't know it's not. This is this temple. This is what it looked like kind of before restoration. And this is those pillars in the front, the big lion pillars. You see how huge they are if you put a person next to them. This is the floor plan of the temple. It adds the porch. Solomon's temple adds this porch. This porch is not in the tabernacle, but it is in Solomon's temple, with 2 pillars. And by the way, the pillars, people argued, if you look at drawings of the tabernacle and the temple, half of them have the pillars freestanding. More than half. Most of them have the pillars freestanding. But in all of these kind of archaeological parallels, the pillars are load-bearing. And so they're known as Jachin and Boaz. Again, people have come up with very esoteric symbolism for this. I'll show you later. This is just the design of a typical palace from the day. And so we're just showing you if God's palace, if kings on earth's palace have these 2 pillars, we're going to add the pillars. And by the way, what changed between the tabernacle of Moses and the temple of Solomon in Israel? They became a monarchy. And suddenly the pillars show up. Well, of course, you're depicting God as a king. There's another temple there that has almost the same floor plan, except it only has 1 pillar, also at Tel Tayanet. Again, you have a courtyard. We believe they had the same altar. There's altars of incense that we found there that very much like the altar of incense at the Temple of Solomon. And then this courtyard, and in the back would have been the place for the statue of the deity here at the Holy of Holies. Ain Dara, though, is fascinating, and I want to just kind of mourn with you for a minute. This place is just on the Syrian side of the border in Turkey. It was a beautiful place, and I've wanted to go there for the last 20 years. And after the Syrian civil war, it was bombed by Turkey and looted by Turkey's forces loyal to Turkey who had made incursions into Syria. So both bombed by Turkey and looted afterwards by Turkey's forces. And it no longer, I would love to see pictures of how much is left, but my understanding is it's almost entirely gone. But this is what it looked like before its destruction. And again, it is in a certain state of ruin, but there's a lot left. It's on the top of this mountain, very much like the Temple of Solomon, built on the Acropolis, at the top of the mountain of the city, with the city down below. And this is the floor plan, and it adds these rooms. And by the way, look at the dates: 12,900, and then 900 to 200. 900 to 700 BC, so 900 to 700 BC. And then, so this later bit here is added about when the Temple of Solomon was built. And these are these rooms around the side, which the Temple of Solomon describes. So what we have here is a temple with 2 pillars. I love the footprints. You see the little footprints? The deity has gone in and hasn't come out and left his footprints behind, so you can tell the deity's in there. That is very much the Israelite version of this story, right, that I told you earlier. The deity's in the temple. With an antechamber, a porch, an antechamber, then a main hall with a shrine for the deity in the back. Not exactly the same floor plan there, but then it adds these rooms. And the archaeologists who have excavated it believed that this might have multiple floors because of its thickness and the way it was built. It could have supported multiple floors. Temple of Solomon supposedly had 3 floors of these side rooms that you could enter. It said, here is where the entrance was in the Temple of Solomon. Well, there's an entrance there. You would go in, and these would be a place where you would store kind of the implements you would use in your worship. Absolutely stunning architecture. Look at this. So, by the way, here's our Mesopotamian cherub guarding the entrance, and there's our pillar with the steps that go in. There's the other side of the entrance, and there's our footprints. And it breaks my heart that this is gone. But again, this is a Philistine, Canaanite, Syrian temple to, I believe, a female deity. Very, very theologically distinct from Israelite worship, and yet its floor plan and its worship structure is almost identical in its form and function. So there's our three of a kind: the Temple of Solomon with its side rooms, Teltai in it, and then Ain Dara with its side rooms in an almost identical floor plan. I'm going to conclude kind of the Levant section by talking about Hatzor. Hatzor is a throne room for a king. This is not a temple. This is a throne room for the king of the city. And notice the two pillars with the porch, then the throne room in the back, and then the elevated platform. There would have been an elevated platform here where the deity sits on his throne, or the king sits on his throne here. Almost the identical floor plan. So what is the iconography trying to say? God is king of the world. So you don't have to believe that this iconography is an eternal symbol of kingship. You could believe this is the symbol of kingship around Israel. So when the Israelites wanted to show that their God is a king of the world instead of just of a city or whatever, they built his temple like a throne, like a palace for a deity, for a king, so that they could properly worship their deity. This is my last one, though, and I think, I don't know how many of you knew this, but the Temple of Solomon is not the only temple to Jehovah, to Yahweh, in Israel. The Bible actually tells us this. They're called the high places. The Bible is not very friendly to these places because it was written years later after the belief that Israelite temple worship had to be centralized in Jerusalem. So there's a movement later on in Israel's history that says you have to centralize worship in Jerusalem. And so they went back and looked at the past worship in light of that new kind of requirement of centralization. And so they looked at these places with a bit of skepticism. On the other hand, these are not temples to pagan gods. These are temples to the God of Israel. There's just a debate about whether they're authorized or not. That's neat because the Temple of Solomon is gone. You can't really go there and excavate and figure out what it looked like. But you can go here and you can excavate and you can see what it looked like. And by the way, when Hezekiah destroyed a rod was destroyed by, we believe, Hezekiah and Josiah later after him, if it was reopened between, I'm not entirely sure. But when that happened, those are the kings of Israel who centralized worship, Josiah and Hezekiah. When that happened, they didn't burn this place and grind it to rubble like you would if it was a Canaanite evil religion. They carefully buried everything in sand, reverently preserving it all. Because you don't want to offend Yahweh, because this is a temple to Yahweh. You just may not think we should worship here, so they very carefully and almost reverently buried the entire thing, which is nice because you pull the sand away and the whole thing is there. So let's look at it. I mean, this is an artist's reconstruction of what this temple looked like. This is what it looked like kind of when they found it before they did some restoration. They piled the stones back up where they think they went, and this is kind of the restored form. This is mostly what it looks like if you go there today. Notice there's a courtyard, and in the courtyard, if I can find my mouse again, here we go. There's our altar for sacrifice in the dimensions described in Exodus, by the way, the right size. And then here's where the laver would have sat. The entrance is kind of offset to the side, and then here's this entrance in the back to a holy place, and then the Holy of Holies in the back. I'm going to flip through some pictures quickly. There's our altar. And then this is looking towards the Holy of Holies, towards the holy place and the Holy of Holies. Again, I need to find my mouse. Yeah, so here's the Holy of Holies, but there's the holy place. The holy place is this kind of long and skinny room. If you look at it sideways, it's not square. It's kind of long and skinny to make it fit in the space. But again, here's where you would have had the table of the showbread, and over here's where you would have had the menorah. But then if we face the Holy of Holies, we have what we would expect, an altar of incense. Except there are two of them. And they found them buried very reverently with the rest of the temple. There are two of them. And if you look further back, there are two tablets of stone. That's also something you might expect. Remember, the Ark of the Covenant has the two tablets of stone written by the finger of God with the law on it? These don't have the law on it. They're just two tablets of stone. And notice, one is smaller than the other and on a slightly raised pedestal. What is going on here? Well, again, both archaeology and the Bible actually bother to tell us. Archaeology tells us because we have inscriptions dedicated to Yahweh and his wife Asherah from this same time period. And the Bible also tells us that they burned incense to Yahweh. Sometimes they'll say in the high places, and that's not good because you're only supposed to do that in Israel. But then sometimes they'll say, and they burned incense to Asherah or to the groves. Asherah is this female deity of the groves. This is an earlier Israelite belief in a god, a more polytheistic time in Israel's history where God still had a wife. In this case, Asherah was his wife, and the debate between the Canaanites and the Israelites was about who gets the girl. Is Asherah the wife of Yahweh, or is Asherah really the wife of Baal? And they would debate about this. And you'll notice when who has the fight with the priests of Baal? Is it Elisha? Elijah, thank you. I'm sorry. I don't know why my brain shut down. When Elijah has the fight with the priests of Baal, you'll remember he goes up there and he's on Mount Carmel, which is the home of Baal, and the priestesses of Asherah all come to watch. And he fights with them and by having these altars set out, and then lightning lights his altar on fire. He prays to God, and God lights his altar on fire, consumes the sacrifice. By the way, sacrifice outside of Jerusalem, right? That's not allowed according to later tradition, but God himself lights that altar on fire, implying that it's authorized. And then all the priests of Baal are killed. And what's missing from that text? No mention of killing the priestesses of Asherah, because they're not killed. They're there to see who wins, because the victor gets the girl, right? And so this is the earlier Israelite tradition. Now, the biblical tradition is that this is wrong. That it's the monotheistic tradition. There's only one God. He has no wife. He has no spouse. This is just wrong. That's fine. I'm not trying to talk you out of that. But the Bible itself recognizes that this was going on at the time. There were groups of people who had this other tradition, and there was conflict between those who believed in this version of Yahweh, the Yahweh with the wife and the spouse, and the other versions of a more monotheistic tradition that evolves out of this earlier belief. If you're interested in this topic, The Hebrew Goddess by Raphael Patai is the classic. No one has done a better job yet that I know of. It is a beautiful book. Go read it, and he'll explain a lot of this history. Very well written, very well done. I also have a discussion on the evolution of monotheism, which you can see on my YouTube channel if you're interested. I'll show you links to some of this at the end. But you can go to my YouTube channel. And here I talk about the Canaanite belief in El, a father deity, and his son Baal, and his son's wife Asherah. And then as the Israelite tradition comes in, it says, no, it's Yahweh is the son of El with Asherah. And then there's a time when Yahweh and El merge and become a single deity. And when that happens, it opens the door to monotheism. And monotheism evolves out of this kind of milieu. And the entire world would be different if that hadn't happened quite that way. And then for a while, Yahweh still has a spouse, and then eventually that too disappears in the later traditions. So conclusions. Ancient Israel temples have dramatic similarities to pagan Near Eastern counterparts. Dramatic similarities. These aren't just minor similarities, they're almost identical in many ways in their forms. The similarities and their differences inform our interpretation, like the missing statue of the deity. That's dramatic departure to something else that's almost identical, and then suddenly there's a small difference, and it makes all the difference. The similarities and the differences inform our interpretation of the biblical text. And I hope that you can look through now these similarities on your own, because I have barely scratched the surface, with curiosity and interest, without any sort of fear that this has to challenge your faith. Again, I don't think it has to in any way. Whatever you believe, whether you believe or whether you don't, this stuff is essential, I think, for understanding, and so we should be interested in it. If you're interested, up here, and I know those online can't see it, but I've got the models of the priest clothes and the temple furnishings. I made these with a great friend of mine who recently passed away, Michael Lyon. He'll be greatly missed. He was an amazing artist, and I think we did this about 50%. My wife did the weaving of the crocheting of the apron, and the ephod and the breastplate. Michael made the stones with the Proto-Hebrew writing on it, straight from the text of the Bible, what was supposed to be written there. The Ark of the Covenant, you'll see, has it's made out of wood and then plaster, and then the plaster is carved and then gold leafed. That is how the Egyptians did their shrines, so it's almost certainly how the Israelites would have done theirs. The text says it's made out of acacia wood and with gold plating, so probably with some plaster carved and then the gold placed on top. There's the table of the presence with the 12 loaves and the bottles of wine. There's the laver for washing, the menorah with 7-branch candlestick, and the altar of sacrifice. So feel free to come and look at these, and I will also stick around after and talk about them, because we could have gone through each of these furnishings and talked about their meaning and things, and we didn't, just because we don't have time. I'm over as it is. There's also some talk about AI, because my last talk here was on AI, if you want to talk about that. I'll be here for the next hour, and I'll just turn this off, and we can talk and answer questions and discuss this further if you're interested. There are discussion questions for the tables up here. Why does the Bible use so much symbolism instead of just being straightforward? What is the best way to interpret the symbolism? Why are there so many similarities between the temples and pagan temples around it? There's a lot of different reasons that might be. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts. What did it mean to the Israelites? And I think more interesting is, what does it mean to us today, if anything? Because it's so divorced from our world that when we see things like this, we're often surprised, alienated. It's just so foreign to us. But does it have meaning? And can it still have meaning for us today? I mean, I think it can, but only if we can kind of remember what the world used to be like and put ourselves back in that place. Then we see what it was all about, maybe a little bit better. If you're interested in these links, sites.google.com, view comparative religion. I apologize for the really nasty URL, but I haven't bought something. This is the free thing I get. This has all of my classes, and when this is over, it will have this class, and I'll put the handouts, I promise, the ones on biblical festivals and the ones on the description of the temple furnishings. I'll put those online here, as well as a link to a recording of this if you're interested. So you can go get that material. And because people online can't see the temple furnishings here, I will put links to pictures I made of all of the temple clothes and the temple furnishings, and I'll link that on that course webpage as well, so you can go there and see those. Yes, questions, thoughts?
Thank you.
We have microphones.
We do. So I think we can take a few questions. Ready? And then I'll walk around the microphone. Do I have one other volunteer to walk around a microphone?
Sure. Is this on? No.
No, this one's not on. Is that one?
But there's probably a button. Here it is. Now it's on. Yes.
Okay.
John.
How did you turn it
I found a button right here.
on? Oh, down there. Okay. Hello?
By the way, I may not be able to answer your question. So I knew this stuff really well 20 years ago, and a lot of it has leaked out, and I had to remind myself before today's talk. So
this isn't so much a question as an observation. The floor plans that you were showing, the Catholic churches have almost an identical floor plan.
I have a set of slides I made on medieval cathedrals and their floor plan with the apse and the cross. They often have a cross as well, so it's slightly different and adapted to Christian, but it's very fascinating and has similarities, and intentionally so. They intentionally reference the Temple of Solomon in the way they design those. And they're fascinating. That is a whole other topic which we could spend another hour on if we wanted to for more
I have a
time.
question. There was an early Egyptian pharaoh, and I forget the name. I think Jack Schlacker may know, but who was monotheistic.
Akhenaten.
And that's it. Yeah, Akhenaten. And so, do you have anything to say about Akhenaten and his influence on any level?
It's very speculative. He happens to show up right about when we might expect the Exodus to happen, and so it's entirely possible that he influences some things that then spread outward. But again, the entire Exodus historicity itself is questionable. I have another talk on Exodus historicity, which is really fun. I love it. I'm far more optimistic than I think a lot of people that something happened that the Bible is based on, rather than just it's all just myth. I think there's some possible historicity there, and if that's true, Akhenaten might have something to do with something. But again, no one knows, and it's a topic that comes up a lot, but no one really knows.
And Dr. Stephen Collins, our archaeologist that'll be here in a couple of weeks, he's also going to address the Exodus and what influenced that.
There's a great book, but it's going to take my brain a while to think of who the author is on Exodus that I highly recommend, and now I can't. Give me a minute, and maybe I can come up with the name of the book. In fact, after, I know I can look it up because it's in my slides for the Exodus historicity. So
I will follow Chick's comment about about correlations in modern religion, that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has temples, and in fact is producing more temples across the world at an extremely rapid rate at this point, so that everybody who is a member of the church can have ready access to the temple. There are significant parallels both in architecture and in theology to what you have described. I thought you did a great job, James. Thank you.
thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that. As most of you know, I'm not a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm a member of the Unitarian Church, but I did grow up in that church. I will make a comment for anyone here who is Mormon that Mormons is the wrong word. I apologize. By the way, when I use that term, I know that this is no longer the way they refer to themselves as a church, but I use the term Mormon in the scholastic sense of anyone who believes in the Book of Mormon, whether they're members of that church or not. There are other people who believe in the Book of Mormon who still call themselves Mormon, who are not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So in that broader sense, I'm not trying to be offensive, Mormons do not, I think, appreciate fully, often, as members, the endowment rituals that Joseph Smith produced, whether by revelation, as you would believe, or by being a very smart cookie, as I would believe. But either way, those rituals this is what I meant by so divorced kind of from modern life, that I know a lot of members of the LDS Church who encounter it for the first time and kind of have a negative reaction, and it's unfortunate, because when you're exposed to this material, I think you realize the genius of that particular ritual. And so I certainly am not here to cast shade on that ritual. I think it's brilliantly done, and has a lot of these same similarities to creation, fall, atonement, Garden of Eden, the three rooms, all of it. So.
How did that happen?
Well,
Do we have another question?
obviously, I believe that we can have a whole discussion about how I believe that happened without revelation. But I'm not here to question your faith that it came because God revealed it. It is whether God revealed it or not. It is in line with what we now believe that the implications of Temple of Solomon were in many respects. It is different from them in other respects. So, whatever that's worth, John.
I have a question.
Yeah, John.
So,
what this does is tickle my curiosity about just sacred spaces. In other words, how much of this can be explained by the way human minds work when they create spaces through their perception of space, as well as their ability to make stories and to use stories to communicate, to use symbols. So how much of what you see in these temples is unique to that particular area, and how much of it is just what human minds do when they want to create a sense of sacredness?
So a man named John Lundquist wrote what he called a topology of temples and temple worship. The danger of that approach is that when you think everything is a hammer, all you start to see are nails. So there's some danger to the typological approach. On the other hand, what he's trying to do is look at the things that most of these things have in common and try to create some sort of listing so that it forms little memory hooks that you can then learn about the rest. I usually begin my comparative religion courses on temples going through his typology. And then I warn people, don't see this everywhere, because you can have what we call parallelomania, where you think you see parallels where there really aren't any. It's a very common disease among people who study this stuff. On the other hand, it gives you a kind of a place to put things in your brain. You know, this is part of this element of sacred space. There are elements that seem almost universal, and they must tell us something about human nature. Like sacred space is guarded space. If you're a Freemason, the Tyler guards the way to the lodge, and that has to happen before any ritual can be performed. If you're in Egypt, the cherubim stand at the entrance to the temple, and the lion gates also guard the way, because the temple space is guarded space. And once you're in that guarded space, then you can be in a sacred space. So there's a whole list of things that are similar across these temples. And again, why? Is it because God is revealing this to all of them? Is it, C.S. Lewis said God gave people good dreams. He believed that God spoke to everybody and kind of gave them pieces of it. There are others who believe there was one eternal truth given to Adam that then kind of spread out with each of them having fragments of it. That one I struggle with, because you kind of see some of these evolve. And so it doesn't look like it's this old, the similarities are all these old pieces that kind of come from a common core. There's others who are pure atheists who believe this has to do with human psychology. That human psychology, when you create these things, we all create something similar. Washing is universal. Every culture in the world washes things.
James,
Yeah.
Just to interject, that there's some speculation that the temples throughout time, and even to this current time, are based on the human body, and with the head and the brain and the connection to the deity being at the top of the head. And so I always found that to be very intriguing and universal. But
I know very little about that.
yeah, you could spend a lot of time talking about that, but it's curious to me. Okay, why don't we?
May I ask one more question? One of the things that comes with the theology of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is that God has revealed himself and his requirements to other civilizations at other times and places throughout history. The Bible gives us an Abrahamic focus, and certainly the promise of the Abrahamic covenant. But what you've presented tonight raises the question, and certainly there are other temples which you didn't talk about in Southeast Asia and in South America and other places, raises the question, did God reveal himself to peoples at different times and places? One of the important points of the Book of Mormon is that people can be very close to God and then lose it, and within a few generations be completely away from the theology. And so the idea that there is a common celestial source, a revelatory source for all of this, which seeds different nations at different times, and where only some fragment remains after a period of time, may be the answer to this question.
So that is the view, I think, of the Book of Mormon. I think for the rest of us, C.S. Lewis gave a different version of this. That is, God gives people what he called good dreams, which are these fragments of the truth that kind of would help them see the real thing when the real thing showed up, and he seeds these everywhere. So that's another version that kind of is more universal that we could describe here. I personally struggle with the Book of Mormon's version. I think there would be much more evidence for something if the actual religion of Mormonism had been revealed hundreds of times throughout the world, and then I think we would, this idea that it can vanish in a day, I think we know far more about those cultures than that. If I give a talk on ancient Mesopotamian religion, it's consistent. It goes back a long ways. It goes forward a long ways. We know exactly what happened. We know exactly what they believed and how they believed. So that I don't find that compelling, but again, I'm not here to challenge your faith. I'm just trying to say that there are many ways people have done that. The Book of Mormon is one of them. And for the rest of you, there's C.S. Lewis, who says something very similar, but far more kind of accessible to everybody, and also something that doesn't, I think, fly in the face of some of the evidence we have in the same way the Book of Mormon does. I find that more challenging to accept from a history perspective. But C.S. Lewis's certainly makes sense.
So let me invite those that would like to stay and have a conversation about these questions. Feel free to join us at the tables, get some more pizza, some more dessert, whatever you like. I welcome continued discussion on this topic. I think it's very interesting, and we welcome all of your comments.
Certainly, and if anyone wants to talk about Scarlett Johansson and
Scarlett Johansson.
and the AI debacle, certainly we can talk about that too. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate you coming.
Thank you, Jane.
Scarlett was the voice of her.